Hi everyone, it's Pam Hubler. I'm excited that you are here with us for the Back to School Conference for Teachers and Educational Leaders. Today's session is going to be on PLCs, professional learning communities in schools. So we're going to pep up your PLCs with Google. Lots of different things, just some tips on how to organize or just some ways to gather information, how to get your teachers to work together. So we'll share lots of good ideas here and hopefully you find something that will work in your schools. And a little bit about me. I am one of the Shake Up Learning trainers, and I am also a Shake Up Learning community manager. So I help support the Facebook group that Casey has for over 22,000 educators. So join if you're interested. And then I'm also a Google certified trainer. Also a level 1 certified educator, level 2. So there's lots of Google going on here. So that's why this PLC conversation is actually going to be organized with Google. And then you can always connect with me on Twitter at Special Techie. You can find me on Instagram at Pam_EduCoach. And you can also find my blog at spedtechgeek.com/blog. And my day job, I am an innovative learning coordinator in South Carolina. And that just means that I get to support teachers on a daily basis to help them integrate technology and other innovative practices with their students to make learning more fun and more engaging and more purposeful. So let's go ahead and dive into PLCs. Okay, what is a PLC? Sometimes you talk about a PLC as just a general professional learning community, like using social media. In this case, what I'm talking about are two different things. And I've got the definition here that a group of educators that meets regularly, shares expertise, and works collaboratively to improve teaching skills and academic performance of students. So there's two parts to that. There's the teaching skills and there is the academic performance for students. They do go hand in hand. The other one is a term also applied to schools or teaching faculties that use small group collaboration as a form of professional development. So sometimes those same PLCs are also groups that meet together to learn new things. Often that is so that way teachers can build some common skills or just common language. Or if you have new teachers that are a part of a community and you've got some teachers that are older, they all help support the same common goal of increasing that academic performance for students. So, and there's a great visual here I wanted to show you. And it is linked in the presentation. This is a great picture chart that was created talking about just general information for PLC teams. I'm going to go ahead and show that. This is a great document that was created and curated by Sherry LaRochelle. And this is just a guide to successful PLC teams. And you can see the big ideas. This is really what I wanted to talk about were the 3 goals of a PLC. And you've got embracing learning for all, creating a culture of collaboration, and focusing on results. And that's the part that should always be included in every PLC. And it's got a good description. And then I love this quote by Rick DeFore. Most effective learning communities are defined by a spirit of reflection and action orientation and to focus on collective inquiry because it's not just one person. And if you are in a school that happens to have just singletons where you only have one teacher per grade level, it's really important to find other places where you can work with teachers that are teach the same thing throughout your district or even in other states. So there's lots of ways to gather together to make learning better. All right, and there is a PLC team cycle. And so I have a template that you can use if you want to with your teachers for that kind of keeps you on track as to which part of the cycle that you're on. So there's focus, there's teach, there's assess, and there's respond. And so that focus part is actually where you're using the data to create common instructional plans and common informative assessments. So you have instructional planning and you have formative assessments. And then after you go from the focus part, you go into teaching, where the teacher uses tier 1 strategies, basically those strategies that can work for everybody. And checking for understanding, and use common formative assessments. So a little bit, two different things that are covered in there. Strategies, which not all teachers share the same strategy. Get those same strategies in their toolkit. And then check for understanding and use common formative assessments. Because there are times where you use different formative assessments just for your own instruction. But there are some times when, and often, that you want to have formative assessments that you use for everybody, so everybody's on the same page as far as the grade level goes when you're looking at standards for your grade level. Then there's assessing, where the team, we want them to analyze the data from those common formative assessments and then determine next steps. So again, two parts where you're analyzing the data from that common assessment and then determining next steps. And every group is going to be different. So it's a really important conversation to have. And then respond, where reteaching is there and enriching based on students' assessed needs. So you do have those students that maybe didn't get it. So you might have to reteach them. But then there are the students that get it the first time. What are we doing for them? So all four of these are super important. So this team cycle is really important to focus on. So we want to make sure that when we are having PLC conversations, that we touch on all four of these as a cycle. This gives you an example of a PLC weekly meeting. This is not necessarily one that you have to do because if you don't have 60 minutes a week, you may not be able to do this. The most important part of this cycle is to touch on all four sections at some point during the meeting. And that PLC environment. Right now, it might be a little different. You might have to do things virtually, or you can do them in person. But the main thing is that they have a pacing calendar here. Most districts have some type of pacing calendar. And if they don't, you still want to figure out what you need to cover over the course of a year so that you make sure you don't get to the end of the school year and realize you have a lot to cover and not enough time to cover it. And then laptops are useful. They've got lesson plans. It does mention music. I can't concentrate with music. That's completely up to you. But student work, snacks, helpful. Food is always helpful. And then common assessments. So I would say the most important is having that pacing calendar, the student work, the common assessments, and being able to look at your lesson plans. If you can do it digitally, it is easier to get back and forth to all your information, and it's a little bit easier to organize. So that's what I'm going to show you as far as how you can get organized with your PLCs. And then PLC guiding questions. This is very common. I've seen this in many different coaching books using these 4 questions as a part of your PLC. 1, what is it that we want our students to learn? 2, how will we know if each student has learned it? 3, how will we respond when some students don't learn it? And then 4, how will we extend and enrich the learning for those who did master it? So this also goes along with personalized learning. So if you know anything about personalized learning, these 4 questions are still super important for all your instructional decision making that's done in a group. And there are some other visuals here that might help you to differentiate between those 4 questions. And this presentation is actually linked below the video. So check it out if this is useful for your schools. And I so appreciate you, Sherry, for creating this. Okay, I also have this link, which is what a PLC is not. And it just gives you, and especially if you're an administrator, you might want to just take a look at this article talking about the 10 biggest mistakes in building a PLC, which is just that general professional learning community. And that way you can kind of look at the different things that they talk about and see if any of those are situations in your school. That way it's a little easier to tell where you need to start in order to fix those problems. Because if you have a certain organization that has done PLCs differently, or if you're new to a building and you don't have a clue how they run them, it is nice to know what you might see that is not productive, so that way you know where to start to fix it. Okay, now we're going to get into the productivity tips for PLCs. And the first one is going to be to create a Google Shared Drive for PLCs. And it's just easy access for everyone, and it keeps emails down to a minimum. because I know some schools will do where they're sending out agendas and they send out ideas back and forth, and it's kind of hard to keep track of. And I don't know how many emails you get a day, but if you do get a lot, it is really hard to keep up with. So, and if you don't have access, you can see this picture right here. This one is my workspace account, and I do have shared drives, but this one is my personal. I don't have a shared drive here. So if for some reason your organization does not have access to Google Workspace, I would suggest just creating a folder that's shared with the team instead of having a shared drive. The only reason I do suggest a shared drive, if you have access to it, is because then it's usually owned by your district. So if anybody creates anything in there and then leaves to go to another school district or retires, you don't lose all the information that they created or gathered in that drive. So that is the benefit of a shared drive over just a regular Google Drive folder that is shared with all the team members. Now, getting organized with your Google Drive. This is one way you can do it. This is how our school did it last year. We had our school staff, and then within that shared drive, we had PLC, committee minutes, and agendas. So everything was in one place. All the grade levels had access to it, and they knew where to find it, and they knew where to add all their agendas. And then after the year is up, you can just drag the folder, like I would drag this one after this year is over. I drag it into my archives and just change the PLC archives from 2017 to 2021. And then within that folder, you'll see I have PLCs 21, 22, and then you can see each of the grade levels. So that way, and this one is a K through 8 school, so that's why we have all 9 of these. Yours might look a little different. And then within those, if you have ELA and you have math or science or social studies, you can have those folders within those. However you want to organize it, it doesn't matter, just as long as it is in one place, easy to get to. And then this is an agenda template with Google Docs. Now I'll show you all this, what it looks like, so that way you can see how I create all these things and how you can make a copy of it as well. And you can see what I was talking about. I've got my focus, teach, assess, and respond. And I do have a description here, so that way if somebody hasn't used it before and they're not quite sure which one is which, it is described so they know exactly what they're looking for. And I have bold, plans, and common formative assessment for focus. So if we know we're talking about plans, okay, that's the area we're on today. Teach, I've got strategies highlighted because that's what we're talking about, just strategies. You might have an entire PLC just on strategies. So this can go from one week to the next. And then assess. This is the part where analyzing the data is super important and determining next steps. So you analyze the data first and then determine next steps. And then the last part, the reteaching and enriching. So after you have the conversation about the next steps, then you get to talk about the reteaching and enriching. And in this Google Doc, all you have to do is click on the box, and it's really easy to be able to check that little box so that way you know which one you're on each week. Let me show you my form, and this is also linked in the presentation and below the video, so you can make your own copy. But I'm going to show you what it looks like. All right, this is what it looks like, and this is just a template. Now, do not request access. All you have to do is click File, and make a copy, and it'll make a copy for yourself. And I'm going to do that right now. And I'm going to call it PLC template for practice, Shake Up Learning. So now that I have this template, I can go ahead and if I want to change the header, all I have to do is add my logo and add our school slogan. And then I can leave that the way that is. And then the rest is pretty self-explanatory. You can put your school name in there, change the grade level, and every time you make a copy, obviously you can make a template per grade level if you wanted to, so that way once it's in a folder, they can just make a copy of it and use it over and over and over again. And also with the attendance. Now I do this just so that way I can see who is at each meeting, because if the next meeting I realize that the main facilitator was different from the meeting before, we might have to go a little deeper into the last agenda in order for them to understand what they missed. And these are just checkboxes. I'm so thankful that Google added the checkboxes in Google Docs now. So you can just click check right there, and you can say that they were there, or if they were absent or not expected. If you know they're going to be in a meeting, you can always check. And those critical team questions, these are the same ones from that presentation I was showing you before, right there at the top, so that way you can always go back to it. Often I will link the last agenda right here, so that way it's easy to get to if we need to go back and look if there were any notes. Then we have which area we're in: focus, teach, assess, and respond. And if we're talking about teaching strategies, I can check that. And then the notes. And if you don't like that it crosses out teach, you can always check off the other ones. So that way teach is the one that isn't checked. It's up to you. Okay, so here is just a simple template. You can change the colors, you can do whatever you want with it. Then the other part is the team's weekly to-do list. The teachers that I've worked with have liked this because then they can go ahead and say, let's see, create assessment. And then I can put the name. I could put when it's due. Let's say 9/2/21. And then I can always put this in there after the fact if I want to. The other thing, I've done this even for my own personal email, I will go ahead and click comment and send this message to myself. And I can do, here we go. And I do want to assign it to myself, so that way I get an email also, which is a very cool feature. And I can just click assign. Then when I'm done with it, I could just go in there and check the little box so that I've done, and then add the date. So it's just a cool feature, and all I did was highlight, and even if it was just a comment, click the add comment, and I can even just start typing my name, and I can assign to you, and then assign, and then I'll get an email. So it's a cool feature that you can use inside Google Docs, and this is helpful for even if you want to tag somebody that isn't there. And let's say my friend Jen was not at the meeting, but she is always the one that creates a certain assessment, then I can go ahead and add her task in there, and I could tag her. She'll get an email. It will link right to this, and she can go right back to the agenda and see what it is that she needs to do. And then question for administrator. Are we allowed? And then you can always finish that. And you don't have to tag them with this because I do want to keep the emails down to a minimum for our administrators because they get so many during the day. The whole idea of having this section is so that way they can go back to the agenda itself if there is a question, and they can see what they need to follow up on. And then if you have items that you didn't get to cover, you can just add this items for next agenda. That way you can go back and look at it before you create the next agenda. So there are just some of the parts that I have in our PLC template. Feel free to make a copy of this for yourself and change it however you want. Then this is the part that and there are directions in the very bottom of how to use this Google Doc and the form. And you can create a copy of the form. I'm going to get into the submit in just a second. So it has the directions. So all you have to do is make a copy of this. You can change everything, but you do want to create a copy of the form. And I'm going to do that. I'm just going to click this. So it forces to make a copy of my Google form, and it's a PLC minute submission form. Okay, I'm making a copy, and I'm not going to do a tour right now. But you can see all the grade levels are listed here. If you have different grade levels, you can change this. The date of the PLC is in here. Question for administrator, yes or no, and then link to the PLC minutes. So it's super quick to fill this form out because I don't want to make it long. I want to make this an easy way to turn in your PLC agendas. So let me go back to the form. Okay, so now the reason I made a copy of that was so that way, I'm going to click send so I can get the link. And I'm just going to copy this link. And then I'm going to go back to my PLC template, click right on this box that says submit, and I am going to click paste and apply. So that way I know if I click on my agenda, it opens the form and then I can fill it out. So let's say I'm second grade. I pick today's date and questions for administrator. I'm going to say yes. That way, when they see this, they know, oh, I need to go back and check that. If there aren't any questions, they may not need to check that PLC agenda for the day. They might if they're curious what's going on, but if they're not going to be micromanaging you, if you have a question, they'll go back and check it out. So, and link to the PLC minutes. I'm going to go back to my PLC minutes, copy it. I just do Control C, and then I click paste, and then submit. So now I have submitted our PLC agenda. It can go to my administrator or whoever looks at it if there is a question, and I can click and I can submit another response. So let me go back to that. And you can obviously delete this after you make your copy. And then once you are in your Google form, you do want to create a spreadsheet. And I'm going to show you that. Okay, so I am in my Google form. I can look at responses this way and see this information, but this isn't going to be helpful for me later as far as following up. So what I want to do is I'm going to click on this little spreadsheet icon and it says create spreadsheet. And you only have to do this once. So I'm going to call this create a new spreadsheet, PLC submission form, responses. I'm going to add the SQL. So I know which one it is, and I'm going to create. And it shows the time that it was submitted, it shows the grade level, it shows the day of the PLC, and then it says, yes, there is a question for administrator. And then here is the link to the document. Now, if you want this to be, let's say I don't need to see the full link. So I'm going to go ahead and say text wrapping. I'm going to say clip because I don't need to see the full link, but I know it's there. I can move it out a little bit if I want to. But as an administrator, I'm going to go ahead and say admin notes. Okay, because I want this to be from my own documentation. Because if I follow up on something, I want to know when I did it and that I did follow up. Another thing I do is I right click on it and I'm going to insert one to the left. I'll shrink this a little bit because all I'm going to do is I'm going to add some checkboxes in here. Once I have that whole column selected, I'm going to say insert and I'm going to click checkbox. Okay, so now I am the administrator. I get an email saying that PLC agenda was submitted. And I'm going to click on this and I'm going to open it up so that way I can see what the question was. And I can scroll down. I can see what the question is. And then I can even just highlight it, click comment. You can, and then I can answer them. I can always tag the person that is the team lead. So that way they get a notification saying that that the answer was given. And you can see your @mention will add people to this discussion and send an email. Okay, and I can go ahead and comment. So, and then they get a message. I'll go back to that. Now I can go ahead and check this off. I'm going to say followed up. And I can even put today's date if I want to. So that way I know I followed up. Because if you have multiple meetings in one day, then it's easiest to go to one location to find all those. And if it says no, you don't have to worry about it. You can look at it later if you want to. Another thing I would do as the administrator is you can go to tools, and then I'm going to click on notification rules. I want to get a notification if a user submits a form, and I'm going to do a daily digest because then at least I get one email with all of them in there. Or if you'd rather to just get it every time somebody submits it, you can do email right away. So it's completely up to you. And then you can save. So now I'm going to get an email every time somebody submits this form. And you can always delete that if you don't want those notifications anymore. And I'm going to click done. So now I have my template that the teachers are using. I have my Google form that the teachers are filling out when they're done with their PLC. And here are the responses. I can look at it here if I want to. I can see the questions. And I can see individually just by grade level. So if this is helpful for you to look at the response tab instead of looking at the sheet, that's fine. I do like the sheet just because then I can just click on each one as I go down. It's up to you. So here were the screenshots, just so you can see what the top of the PLC agenda looked like, and just that focus section with the focus, teach, assess, and respond. And again, if you have different structure, change it however you want. And then this is the part that if you really want to keep track of your PLCs, it is very helpful. The only reason why I even started this was because I did have an administrator that wanted to know when a PLC agenda was filled out. So she wanted notifications, and she had asked, can I get notifications anytime anything is updated in my drive? Nobody wants that because you'd be getting emails all day, every day, nonstop. So this was the workaround in order to still get notifications when a PLC form was filled out, and then to be able to go back and check it and just keep track of all your teachers. And if they do need something, then you know you're following up with all of them if they need it. And this is what the directions say at the top, just so that way they do give them the information and so they know how to fill it out. And then here's another screenshot, the submission responses, and you can see how this one looks. This one was an actual one that we used, the dates of the PLCs, and you can see a lot of these say no. So they may not be followed up on. It's fine. But we know that they were all submitted. This is the admin tip that I added. If the questions for administrator says yes, just click on that link in the PLC so that way you can use a comment feature and respond right back to them, just like I showed you. Or assign it to a team lead if you want them to get the email. Okay, the other type of PLC that we were talking about, or the way you use that PLC time, would be that for learning, for teachers to be able to learn and use a small group collaboration as a form of professional development. So there's lots of different ways. And the reason why that's important is because of that teach section, where our teachers use the tier 1 strategies, check for understanding, and use common formative assessments. So you might want to use a PLC time to teach those strategies. Or if you've been doing observations as an administrator, or if maybe a coach has been in your room and said they loved how you did something, and can you please teach the other teachers on a grade level how to do something, then that's a really good use of that time because the teachers are learning something and they can take it right back to their students. And then that creating common assessments. Sometimes you need new strategies in order to do that. There's lots of different ways for you to be able to create new assessments. And I'm going to show you, this is what I have here is a guest blog post that was written by Paula. And she had this great idea that I saw on Twitter, and it's PD in a cup. So it just was there were a bunch of different strategies in this case. You can see this picture. There were strategies, articles, videos, all sorts of things on a certain topic. And she cut them out, put them in a cup, and then put them in the planning rooms so that way the teachers could learn a certain strategy when they had them in it. You might even do this during the PLC time or give it to them where they can go back to their rooms. It's up to you. But this is just a really neat way to be able to provide some professional development. I also have this one, and you may have seen the other session. I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, but on Potty PD. So that's another way that you can give your teacher some professional development and teach those strategies or formative assessment. And that's also linked below this video. Another resource I wanted to share with you when you're talking about strategies and formative assessments. This is something that's very common that if you are an instructional coach, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And principals, administrators, sometimes they talk about Hattie and talking about teaching effects and visible learning. And I'll just show you some of the links that are under this presentation. This is one where we're talking about teaching effects and that effect size, like basically the things that teachers do that can actually affect learning the most. And one is providing formative evaluation. They've got comprehensive interventions for students with learning disabilities, reciprocal teaching, feedback, spaced versus mass practice, and metacognitive strategies. There's a bunch of different ones, and you can see as it goes down, some are less effective. So when you're thinking about what you want to do during PLCs, you might want to stick with the top part of this as far as what you really want to work on. Then there's another one that has 252 influences and effect sizes related to students' achievement. And when you look on the bottom, there are tons of them. And the top one is collective teacher efficacy. So that shows how important it is for us to work together with our teachers, for them to really understand what they're teaching, why they're teaching it. And then they do have others like self-reported grades and teacher estimates of achievement, cognitive task analysis. So look at these two when you're talking about the reason as to why you want your teams to work together to create those formative assessments and to look at strategies together. So here we are to the resources that we were talking about. There are some below this video, and I've got the PD in a cup linked. There's a PLC blog and template. And then Shake Up Learning also has 15 ways to use Google Classroom in professional learning. So it might be a tool that you can use with your faculty and staff in order to share these resources if you don't have common PLC times that you can really do this with. Sometimes that happens. It just depends on your school. So check those out. And then we are at the point where we are done talking about PLCs, and we would love to work with you some more if you need it. Any of us here in the Shake Up Learning team would be happy to help virtually, in person, whatever works for you. Just click on the work with us, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for coming today.